Join Winnipeg Sports Talk, live from the NHL Draft in Las Vegas, presented by CoolBet, beginning on June 26th.
All right, Wednesday, we begin our NHL Draft shows presented by CoolBet live from Vegas. But before we headed out there, we wanted to make sure we hooked up with our pal Cam Robinson from Elite Prospects, who I'm sure we will see in Vegas, but it's great to have here on Winnipeg Sports Talk kicking off the week. What's up, Cam? How are you?
Doing well. A little bit of action going on in the hockey world here right now. So it's a fun little segue into Vegas and my favorite time of year.
As you can imagine, in Winnipeg, there is a story that dominated sports conversations all weekend long, and that is these latest reports of Rutger McGroarty and the Jets being at somewhat of an impasse in a potential trade. What you did some tweeting on this weekend. What was your reaction when you heard, I guess probably Saturday morning, Elliot Friedman's report that Rutger McGroarty's name was being thrown out in trade talks?
Well, I'll say this much is that when, a couple months ago or whenever it came out that he was going to go back for a third season, my spidey senses were tingling a little bit because, this is a kid who just put up 52 points in 36 games or whatever it was in the NCAA. Like, that was top 5, top 6 in the nation. He's a big body guy. Physically, he's ready to come out. I think emotionally, he's ready to come out. Like, this is a very mature individual. I think he has a greater goal scoring potential that he hasn't really unlocked at the college level yet, that maybe you could justify going back for that. Maybe you could justify going back because you're like, hey, I'm going to get some of this NIL money that the NCAA kids are getting, that maybe that's more cash than you'd get in the AHL. But I didn't like it. And I remember having some arguments with some people. They were like, no, it makes sense that he goes back for that third season. I was like, I don't know about that. So when I did hear that report from Friedman, I was like, yeah, that I'm not shocked. And so I got on the phone and I started texting some people, and it does sound like, McGroarty is driving the bus on that. And I know that's been kind of put out there a little bit too, and some more Winnipeg centric reporters, is that he's maybe thinking that his future is better served elsewhere. Now, we can speculate that if that's simply because he's like, I wanted to come out and have an NHL job waiting for me. You look at Frankie Nazar, just stepped into Chicago, coming out of Michigan, got himself NHL time. He'll be on the big club this year. Chicago's a bottom feeder. Or we can look at like how the Jets have handled some of their young talent in recent years, right? Like Cole Perfetti's a really talented kid who just like can't get in the lineup full time. So there's and also an American kid in Winnipeg, right? Like, it's just not, unfortunately, a desirable location for a lot of American players. So for whatever the individual reason or the collective reasons for it, it does sound like McGroarty's like, I think I'm probably better suited elsewhere. And if you could look for a spot for me, I'd appreciate that. And that's tough, right? Because it's already hard to lure free agents to Winnipeg. So it's like you need those homegrown kids that can come up and make an impact on their entry-level deals. And so to lose out on them, and then if the league knows this, like if I'm finding out, GMs are finding out too, and they're not being throwing life preservers, right? They're going to be throwing anchor offers when they think of players like asking out and a team's, kind of had their hand forced a bit.
The one thing I'll say for Shovel Dayoff is he's been in similar positions before. And number one, time is on his side. I mean, You've still got this player for 2 years. And I mean, if the entire argument or basis of the beef is the fact that they want to be in the National Hockey League this year in October, sitting out for 2 years doesn't really seem like that is part of the plan. So you would think going, and I mean, I'll leave this to you. Rutger McGroarty, considering where he was picked for the Winnipeg Jets, seemingly has been rising. And maybe it's his personality. Maybe it's a lot of other things that brought to the table. He's as exciting as a prospect as we've had in Winnipeg for a long time. And that's why this is so, I think, concerning for the fan base. But as a player right now, do you think, like, is he ready for NHL for prime time? There has been talk that his skating still needs to improve. And I mean, if you look at what happened to the Jets against the Avalanche in the playoffs, you look at this team needs to get faster. Where is he as a player right now? And should there be an NHL spot for him waiting in October?
It's an interesting question because I do think that he is very likely NHL ready. The feet have gotten better since his draft year. That was kind of the knock, is that he was this kind of like big, burly power forward, but wasn't the quickest. I think that has improved. And, at the World Juniors, not an issue. At the college level, not really an issue whatsoever. It probably, that the pace of play is going to jump up and he hits the pros, and he'll have to adapt to that. But he's smart as well. So he knows how to maximize his situations to get kind of a jump on things again at the level that he's played at so far, and he'll have to readjust at the NHL level. Whether or not he should have an NHL spot waiting for him is circumstantial. It's like, obviously the Jets are a good team, playoff team, one of the best in the Western Conference last year. So it's like they don't need to just sit there and be like, we got 3 or 4 spots just sitting here waiting. They want to contend for a Stanley Cup, which means that, you don't prioritize that thing. But at the same time, the situation in Winnipeg being that it's like I mentioned earlier, they have a difficult time bringing in marquee free agents, convincing people to come there, guys having them on their no trade list. So if you have this really exciting, talented young player in your pipeline, you probably want to appease them as best you can to ensure that they do stick around, and maybe they sign a long-term deal when they break out and you can keep them long-term. So in the case of Winnipeg, it's like, in a vacuum, no, they shouldn't have to hold a spot for McGroarty. He should have to come to camp and earn that spot. But because it's Winnipeg, they should probably be like, yeah, you have to win a spot, but here's where we envision you playing in the fall on this third line right here, or something like that, right? And then it's on him to make sure he gets that spot. And I think that if you told him that, it's like, nothing is assured, but if he signed at the end of his last season, yeah, we'll plug you in. We'll get you in some regular season games. We're not saying you're getting in any playoff games, and then next season, here's a spot we could see you in, and then you got to earn it. I think that probably would have been enough for him to sign and come out.
I mean, when I think about this situation, from what we're hearing, it's the McGroarty people kind of driving the bus, and the Jets have been somewhat forthcoming, like, hey, we want to sign you. We want you in the mix. We're not 100% sure that that you'll start the season in the National Hockey League, let's just say. I mean, you could just BS the people and say, oh, that's all good, looking forward to seeing you camp, and go the other way. But then that has a real effect to it as well. And it seems like just being open and honest about it is sort of biting the Jets right now, but I'm not sure there's another way to go about it. Like, listen, if you're drafted in the top 5, you're probably going to a team that sucks, and there's probably a lot more opportunity than being drafted in the middle of the first round by a team that, is in the playoffs and certainly had a much better season last year with 52 wins.
I totally agree. And, open and honest is usually the best course, like almost always, right? Because like you said, if you lie and you say like, yeah, you're come on out, we got a spot for you, and then they stick him in the minors, now all of a sudden he's disgruntled before he's even started his career, right? And you don't want to start off on the wrong foot like that. So yeah, it does seem like it's biting them a little bit, kind of just being honest and open about where they think he is as a player and where they are in their life cycle as a contender. Which, like I said, if this was Toronto, it wouldn't be a problem, because it's just like kids want to play in Toronto, and they'd just be like, yeah, okay, I got to go earn my spot there. But unfortunately, it is Winnipeg, and that's just kind of how it is.
Cam Robertson with us from Elite Prospects here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. One of the other things about Rutger, certainly that has attracted the fan base to him so much, but I mean, every scout that we've talked to, even back when he was getting picked, was more than just the actual player. It was, it was the person. I mean, his incredible energy. He's been the captain everywhere that he's been before. Does the fact, considering he was always this super character guy that was going to be a culture builder for your team, does this take a shine at all off of him and that part of him as a prospect, that they're squeezing a team before he's even signed a contract?
I mean, he is he's a fun character too. Like I got to spend a little bit of time with him in Gothenburg there at the World Juniors, and funny kid, witty, on point, charismatic, enthusiastic. It's easy to enjoy spending time with someone like that. He's also best buddies with Cutter Gauthier, right? And who they're not rep by the same agency, but it looks like they're taking the same route here. And Gauthier doesn't have kind of that personality resume behind him where Rutger did. But I mean, I'm torn, because a pro athlete in hockey, it's like your career is so finite, right? Your opportunity to make money, to find success, it's a very small window. And so to take some ownership and some onus onto yourself and be like, I think that my career is best served, that I have a hard time knocking players for that. Now, if he was just being pissy about, not getting enough ice time in his second season when he's not doing anything, then I'm like, get better, do better, earn more. But in this sense, I think that he has, proven that he's a top prospect and probably maybe more valuable than the slot he was taken at. So in his mind, he's like, I'm doing everything I can so far at this point. Where's my cookie? Where's my reward? And I don't think that that's too much to ask either. But at the same time, like, I don't know the exact same backstory too. Like, who knows if he told them in the interviews, the combine in his draft, you're like, I'm not really interested in playing in Canada, or I'm not really interested and they just went ahead and drafted him anyways. And now this is like something that they've set on motion themselves. Again, I have no idea if that's the case.
If that's the case, he is, never mind a hockey player, we should send him to Hollywood, because everything that he said while he's been here has been, 100%. I can't wait to be a Jet, to be here in Winnipeg. Like, you want to talk about a guy saying all the right things? He's done it, which is why this report caught everybody so off guard this weekend when it dropped. Yeah.
And I haven't been following it as closely outside of the Winnipeg world. But he seems like a genuine person to me too, right? So it would be, so maybe this is, maybe I'll have to do some more digging. Maybe this is something that like it's not just a simple fact of, he's feeling a little slighted by them not having a spot open for him. Maybe something else has happened in recent times. Maybe those discussions didn't go over as friendly as he would have liked. Maybe there was some pushback, where he said, I do think I'm ready. And they're like, we don't. And then, that's kind of created this riff, and it's more recent. But it will be very interesting to watch. And like, if he wants out, I'm sure he will get out. And then what I'm really interested to see is like, how do the Jets handle it? Because like you said, excuse me, time is on their side, but at the same time, you don't really like that, that laundry kind of hanging out there for too long. And with the draft this week, there could be an opportunity for them. This is wheeling and dealing time to move a player like that. And maybe like, could they pull a top 10 pick out of this draft? Could they pull another, good looking prospect in the later first or something like that? Like, if teams are really, really interested in Rutger, which I have a feeling there's going to be a handful that are, they could make this a quick deal, get it done with, and then maybe have a new shiny toy to hand to their fan base right away, right? And which I think would be pretty good to placate them.
Well, and I just think back to our conversations on this show around the trade deadline. There was a ton of interest in Rutger McGroarty. When the Jets are looking to make trades, they're like, how about never mind your first round pick? What about Rutger?
Yeah.
And he was thought to be untouchable by the organization. And, from the more people I talked to over the weekend, it seems like something in and around or after the Frozen Four seems to have gotten sideways, because there really was almost no indication that there was any issues whatsoever. And in fact, I was stunned like you that he just didn't sign right afterwards and come here. So there is more to it. As a player and a prospect right now, what do you make of his value? Listen, I think that there'll be tons of teams, especially American teams, that would look at a guy like that, what he projects to potentially exactly what Winnipeg thought that they were getting, a young man that can come in, be an impact player and a real culture carrier going forward. It's good for Winnipeg if there's lots of teams interested, which I imagine there would be. But again, 2 years removed from being drafted, seemingly ready to break into the NHL. Those players are in a very different spot than, for instance, the Jets would be getting if they got a top 10 pick as part of a deal, knowing that that completely resets the clock of when this guy can help your organization.
No, exactly right. And that's why it will be so interesting to see is like, do they just maximize the value if they do deal him? And if the top value is a draft pick, do they just take that, or do they go and be like, okay, let's trade him as if it was maybe not a deadline deal, but do they package him up for a player with a couple years left on his tag in his mid 20s or late 20s? Someone, do they dangle him to Carolina in part of a Marty Nakash deal or something like that, right? Where it's like a more win now aspect, where they may have to add more pieces to get it done. So that's what I will really be curious to see how they go about it, because like I mentioned, they're in the upswing of their competitive window. And I'm sure they're not really interested in taking a step back. I don't think trading him for a draft pick necessarily indicates that either, but it does, like you said, it kind of shifts that when this player can be impactful for us down the line. Whereas like this, McGroarty could have been potentially a valuable third liner next season or the season after, right? Playing in a top 9 role and then building.
Hey, let me ask you this from someone that, is well connected throughout the league, that is really focused on prospects. Part of the conversation that's come out with this, from some, it's a knock on the Jets organization, is the way they quote unquote treat their younger players. Listen, Ville Heinola has had a tough time getting into the lineup. He really had made the team out of camp, got injured, and that blew up his entire season. But the year before, he was playing with the Moose. Many people thought he probably was ready to go, but they didn't have him in there. And obviously, they thought Cole Perfetti, was on this team this season, and he was sort of a hot topic here in that, you look at his numbers, and they were quite good. He had 2 assists in 22 games at one point and sort of found himself on the outside looking in, and the Jets went and got a couple guys into Foley and Monahan to round out the top 6 looking ahead to the playoffs. Like, do the Jets have a rep when it comes to how they handle their younger players? And is that something that could be playing a role in this situation?
I mean, yeah, and I did touch on that. I do think that, at least externally from public perception and maybe potentially player perspective, is that, Perfetti's if he didn't score 20, it was darn close, right?
19.
And 19, yeah. And as a young player, a talented young player, a top prospect, a high pedigree kid, you would imagine that player would be given an opportunity. Like a kid like Niels Höglander in Vancouver, he scored 20-21 this year, and it was kind of his breakout season. And then, he played top 6 minutes almost the entire playoffs. He didn't do all that great, but he had that opportunity. Not as high skilled, not as high pedigree as a guy like Cole Perfetti, and Vancouver and Winnipeg, comparable situations this year as contenders. So, I'm not so mad about Ville Heinola, but I do think that Perfetti move it's like they're obviously like their value is placed on experience. And like you said, they brought in some guys that had a lot more experience in regular season, in playoffs, veteran guys you can count on. But you do want to keep your homegrown talent happy, right? You want your talent to stay in-house if you can afford it, because often that means saving money, right? You're going to save on the cap. You're going to save on assets that you have to trade for. So I do think that, and listen, I love Kevin Cheveldayoff. Like he's a beauty. I think he's a very intelligent person, and I'm sure he has logic behind all his decisions on how they manage that. But I do think with the situation in Winnipeg, it is a little bit different than in some other venues, and rightly or wrongly, it might be the best thing for a kid like Cole Perfetti in the long run. But in the microcosm right now, the window we're looking, I'm sure that was easy for Rutger to look at as well. It's like, hey, they're not even going to offer me a spot in games here to come out and sign my deal and get some NHL cash. Look what they're doing to Perfetti, a kid who's, arguably at the same level that I am, a couple years ahead of me. And am I going to be looking at being a healthy scratch in the playoffs when I'm 21, 22? Is that, my path? Or do I want to get out of here and go land in Chicago and go play with Frankie Nazar and have a chance to play with Bedard and come up with a team and be a big part of it?